So good morning to all of you. Hi, my name is Ginny. I am the principal consultant of Optimal Consulting Group. I'd like to first extend a very warm welcome to all of you. This is the webinar entitled The Art of Scientific Coaching. And this webinar is brought to you by OCG, Optimal Consulting Group, in partnership with Hogan Assessments, right? So during this webinar, we are going to find out how to increase the impact of leadership coaching with the science of assessments. So I have with me quite a few of our partners from Hogan Assessments. So let me just introduce you to them, and I'll just wave as I introduce. First of all, Crystal Patterson, right? And I have Nicole, and I have Anne-Marie, and I have Ranyu. They are all from Hogan Assessments, and they are serving you from the Hogan Assessments Asia Pacific office. And of course, I have with me our colleagues, right, from Optimal Consulting, all over in Optimal Group. Definitely my colleagues from Shanghai, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Singapore. Myself, I am based out of Malaysia, the KL office specifically. And of course, we have our speaker from Hogan Assessments, Miss Jocelyn Hays. Right. So thanks, Jocelyn, logging in all the way from US. What time is it over there now?
It is 9:03 p.m. So I had the fun of telling my kids that I was going to talk to people tonight who are already into tomorrow morning.
Wow. Yeah, we're way ahead of you. 12 hours ahead of you, having to wake up already. Okay. So maybe I'll just do a quick introduction of Optimal Consulting Group first, followed by Hogan Assessments. And then I will then also introduce our speaker before I hand over the mic to you, Jocelyn. Okay, so a little bit about Optimal Consulting Group. All right, we have been around for 20 plus years now, with offices in Singapore, KL, Shanghai, as well as Hong Kong. And we also have an office in Tokyo. So we have been working with our clients around in this region, as well as most of the MNCs with their head office based in Asia as well. So most of you who are here will probably be familiar with some of my colleagues. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, and do drop a note to say hi at the end of this webinar should you have any questions. We will definitely be reaching out to you as well should we have any materials that's related to this webinar that we would like to share with you. So next, let me introduce to you Hogan Assessments and our distinguished speaker. So Hogan Assessments was founded in 1987, right? They have since assessed more than 11 million people around the world in 54 languages, conducted more than 1,500 research studies, and certified more than 55,000 users, of which quite a few of the certified users are here together with us today. Right. So that's about Hogan Assessments. Definitely a lot more that I can tell you about, but the focus today is the webinar and of course our learned speaker. So Jocelyn Hays is a director of product development and HTP Center operations at Hogan Assessments. She focuses on building interactive personality assessment solutions and the platforms needed to support them. For more than 15 years, she has worked to design and implement talent assessment solutions for use throughout the employee life cycle, from selection and onboarding to leadership and team development and succession planning. Wow, that's a lot. Jocelyn has experience in talent identification and development at all organizational levels, from individual contributor positions to the C-suites. She has conducted job analysis, built competency models, and conducted criterion-related validation studies to inform selection, training, and development initiatives. She has also designed and facilitated assessment-based coaching, leadership growth, and team development programs. So Jocelyn has also created custom content solutions to enable effective use of scientifically valid assessments in clients' broader talent management initiatives. So Jocelyn is also involved. Yeah, in fact, she leads the Agile software development team to envision, design, and development Hogan's next generation assessment administration system and web-based interactive solutions to enhance leadership effectiveness, team dynamics, and organizational performance. Jocelyn holds a Master of Science degree in Industrial Organizational Psychology from Purdue University and is a member of the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. My goodness, Jocelyn, that's a lot of achievement. Yeah, so thanks to Jocelyn, Hogan Assessments is definitely one of the very user-friendly assessments that we've actually been using for the last, for myself, the last 12 years, and definitely for quite a lot of our clients here and participants here today who has been actually experienced Hogan assessments themselves as well. So thank you to you, Jocelyn. So this has been a very, very, it's a privilege to be able to meet the backbone in all this very, very user-friendly assessment solution. Okay, just before I pass the mic to you, Jocelyn, let me just do some housekeeping for everybody who's here, all right? Please remain muted during the presentation. If you have any question, all right, there will be a QR code in the presentation where you can access the online survey form and you can leave your question there. So I will gather these questions and do my best to ensure all are addressed during the Q&A segment at the end, right? The presentation will be approximately 40 minutes. So following the presentation, we will allocate 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A. So after the webinar, expect an email from my colleagues. We will actually be sending to you brochure and contact details for any further queries. Okay, so I guess that's all in terms of housekeeping. So over to you, Jocelyn.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. Thank you everyone for taking the time to attend. And the topic today is really one that is near and dear to my heart, both because I spent about the first 15 years of my career in consulting and coaching using talent assessments specifically. And then more recently, because I've been in product development. And so I have really spent a lot of time trying to understand what it is that leaders do and need in order to be successful, because Hogan Assessments, that's kind of our space, right, is leadership development and coaching. That's a big part of what we do. And so in my more recent work, I've really been focused on building out assessment solutions specifically for leadership development and coaching, right? At Hogan, we really want to help leaders be better. We say that we are trying to make the world a better place to work, one leader at a time. And so this is a topic area that is just really near and dear to my heart. So thank you so much for having me and for taking the time to be here. So I'm a data person. If you're familiar with Hogan Assessments, I'm a high science person. So I always like to start off with a little bit of fun facts supported by the data. So as you look at this list, kind of think in your mind, if I was a CEO, if I was heading up an organization in today's world, what would be the kind of number one thing that would be keeping me up at night? What would be the number one thing that I would be thinking about, when I got up in the morning and when I went to bed at night? And in a survey that included things like economic factors, succession planning factors, competition, and growth, the thing that went right to the top was actually attracting and retaining top talent. So this is a survey that was done last year. And what they found was that the number one concern of C-suite individuals, chief executive officers, was really around attracting and retaining talent. So even when you ask about recession, competition, uncertainty, all of those things are important. All of those things are top of mind. But I think that the talent piece kind of rises above those, because it's in attracting and retaining top talent that you can address issues of growth, competition, changes in the marketplace, changes in the global economy. And then if we ask people, okay, well, if the number one thing that we want to do is attract and retain top talent, then what's the number one thing that makes top talent want to leave? Why is it that we are struggling to attract these people and retain them? And again, in a survey that included multiple factors and kind of all factors that are important, the one that rose to the top is ineffective leadership. Ineffective leadership tends to be the number one reason that people leave jobs. And so if you've heard that kind of old cliche that people don't quit jobs, they quit their boss or they quit their supervisor, this really holds true in survey data. When people are asked, holding all other things constant, what is it that makes you leave? Is it your coworkers? Is it your pay? They say, no, it's the leadership. And the nuance in this is that top talent, so the people that organizations say are high potentials, the people that they really want to retain the most to grow and to promote, they are actually more likely to leave due to ineffective leadership. So, your average talent might leave due to a boss, but your best talent is more likely to leave due to a boss. And that's really interesting. And it really, when we look at those kind of individual survey items, it is very cohesive with what we see across the board in broader surveys, right? So overall, when we go out and we ask people around the world, what do you think of your leadership? What do you think of your organization's leadership? What do you think of when you look to the future to grow your bench? And as some leaders leave, put new leaders in place. Across the board, people say that they are kind of worried about that, right? They kind of have this low confidence in overall leadership success and leadership effectiveness. And so, of course, when you see those kind of statistics and they're, a little dismal, you think to yourself, well, what is it that's happening here? When we look at this, and this is something that I am really passionate about in my work, I don't think that anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be an ineffective leader, right? Or I'm going to go out there and be the reason that someone wants to leave their job and go somewhere else. I think that individual leaders are doing their best. I think that what the reality is that leadership is a hard job. And when you look at the research, it really backs this up. This idea that being a leader in any function, in any organization, in any geography is a tough job to do is really backed up by the data. And some of it are things that are outside of the leader's control, right? So technology and innovation moves at a rapid pace. You could tell from my bio there that I have been around for a while, and I'm not bothered by that because I'm maintaining my youthful glow, but I have been in this industry now for 20 years. And so I can say that this kind of pace of technology, the pace of innovation, things like AI, things like data privacy, none of that is getting any easier. None of that is getting any simpler. It's becoming more and more complex. And then when we look at these surveys, there are things that matter to an organization and matter to a leader that are just completely outside of their control, right? So economic factors, the age of the workforce, what's happening in the specific regions of the world that they're in. There are things that they can't control but still have to contend with. These last 2 points that I have in bold text here, that's what we're going to focus on today, because there are 2 things that really make a leader's job difficult, but that we as coaches and consultants, I think, can impact in a very positive way. One is the fact that leadership requires these kind of competing and complex demands. So when you become a leader, we're not asking you to do one thing or 2 things. We're asking you to do myriad tasks that sometimes fit together and complement each other, but can also really conflict with each other and leave you with a balancing act with some hard decisions to make. The other thing, and this, of course, is something that we talk about all the time at Hogan because of the business that we're in, the science of personality. It is difficult as a leader to get truthful, accurate, real-time feedback in order to build self-awareness. So I want to dive into those last two factors just a little bit, and then we'll spend some time talking about what we can do about it. So the first is this idea of complex leader demands. When we at Hogan look at leadership, when we at Hogan look at anything, we start with research, right? We call ourselves the science of personality. Our founder is still very active in our research. We have lots of PhD psychologists, running around doing research work. And so when we look at leadership, the first thing we say is, well, what does the research tell us about leadership? And what we find is that when you look at leader effectiveness, the way to define that, the truest, the most accurate way to define an effective leader is someone who can build and maintain a high-performing or effective team. So at the core of these leadership demands is this idea that you have to be doing something that makes other people want to follow you. So right away, there are things that you have to be thinking about that are not about your behavior, but really about how your behavior impacts others, impacts the people on your team. So then we say, okay, well, if we go out and we say to followers, what do you want out of a leader? What kind of leader would make you want to be on their team and perform well? They really highlight kind of 4 characteristics. So the first is around credibility. Can you tell me what we are trying to do and how we can do it well, right? So if you want me to be on your team, I need to know the game that we are playing, and I need to know how to win in that scenario. The second thing is really around judgment. So if I am going to follow you, I want to believe that you are making good decisions for the right reasons. The third, and this probably isn't surprising, is support, right? We're all human beings. If I'm going to work for a leader, I want that leader to relate to me, to pay attention and have some care for me, but also to help me do my job, to provide some guidance, to provide some direction. And then the fourth thing is really integrity. Do I believe that you have my best intentions at heart? Do I believe that for all the work you're asking me to do and all the ways that you're asking me to get better, get faster, get more results, whatever it is, do I think that you will do those same things? Are you leading by example? So when we look at what followers want and we say, well, what does that mean for the leader? How does a leader show credibility? How does a leader demonstrate integrity? We're really able to look at this in terms of domains. And that's what you see in the circles on the slide here. So what we know is that leaders are often, if not always, asked to perform in a strategic leadership domain. We want you to work on the business. We want you to set a vision and a strategy, and we need you to promote ideas and make decisions that get us to that strategy, that fulfill that vision. At the same time that we need you to work on the business, we need you to work in the business. And that's what the operational domain is all about. So yeah, we want you to create a vision, but you also have to know how to implement that vision and how to get other people to help you do it. Interpersonal and intrapersonal are probably a little bit more straightforward, right? Interpersonal, in order to be a leader, people have to like you to some degree. They have to believe that if they work hard for you, you will in turn support them and have, a benevolent motivation and effect for them. And then finally, the intrapersonal is really about how you manage yourself. If I'm going to follow you as a leader, I need to see that you can help me overcome challenges, create security and stability in my job. And also, as I am growing and as our organization is changing, I want to see you doing the same thing, adapting, growing, becoming better as we go along. The thing about this, when you look at these domains, you think, oh, okay, We'll find somebody who works on the business and somebody who can also get down into the details and implement strategies and ideas. We'll find somebody who's very persuasive and easy to get along with, but also has some humility and some ability to set rules and policies and procedures and hold others accountable. But what's difficult about that is that you cannot be short and tall at the same time. I had a leader at Hogan say this to me one time, and I'm not really sure to this day how he meant for me to take it, but we were having a conversation about leadership, and he said, Jocelyn, you can't be short and tall at the same time. And what I took from that was we are asking leaders to be short and tall at the same time. So yes, we want you to behave in a strategic way. We want you to set a long-term vision. We need you to attract and retain talent with a strong interpersonal approach. We need you to grow and develop your team, but also we need you to implement the vision that you set. We need you to make sure that while you are taking care of your talent, you're also holding them accountable and challenging poor performance when it's needed, or less than satisfactory results when it's needed. And just like we need you to grow and develop your team, you have to grow and develop yourself too. And so when you look at this from a personality standpoint, what immediately becomes clear is that no one person does all these things, right? Someone who is naturally very good at creating vision, coming up with ideas, they might not be as naturally adept at implementing ideas, following through. They're kind of two opposite approaches, two opposite skill sets almost. And so that's what we mean when we say these competing demands. What we mean is that we're giving leaders jobs that no one person could just naturally do well. No matter who you are, no matter where you lead, if you are a leader, you are going to have to kind of figure out, where can I lean into strengths and where do I need to adapt? Because there's no one that's going to come in and do all these things within an organization just easily and naturally, right? It's going to require some work no matter who you are. The other thing that we look at is awareness. And this is one that, again, being the science of personality, this is just interesting to us. But think about if you have ever worked for someone who overestimated their capabilities or their effectiveness. Think if you've ever worked for someone who everybody would say kind of one thing about them, but they would say something else, right? They have that blind spot. They're not necessarily aware of what other people are saying or thinking, or they're kind of evaluating their own performance in a way that feels inaccurate or feels like it's missing something. That, as it turns out, is totally natural. Strategic self-awareness is really difficult, right? It's very difficult as human beings to be self-aware, and let alone strategically self-aware, because with strategic self-awareness, what leaders need to understand is not just, this is my approach, here's where the strength is, here's where the need for adaptation is. Leaders need to understand, this is my approach, and here's what it looks like in comparison to others around me. This is my approach, and here's where I can leverage a strength and offer it to my team so that they can learn. This is my approach, and here's where I have maybe a need for development, and I have somebody on my team that's their strength, that I can learn from them. So it's kind of this higher order self-awareness that we're asking leaders to possess. But at the same time, we know that self-awareness does not come cheap, right? It is a hard challenge to win, because number one, human psychology is set up so that we don't want to, understand or say or think about, the bad about ourselves, right? Our egos are self-protective. People will go to great lengths to explain or justify their behavior. At Hogan, when we coach, we talk a lot about intent versus impact, because oftentimes if you find a leader who is struggling, they will say, well, this was not my intention. Here's what was going on in my mind. Here's what I meant to do. And we have to talk them through, well, nobody can see your intent, right? People can only see your impact. And so you really have to focus on how others see you versus how you are seeing it in your mind. And then it's, people are people, and we are our, own greatest advocates at times. We are our own worst enemies at times. human nature is complex. And just because you behave one way on a good day does not mean that that will be how you behave when you're under stress. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So that's another thing that just makes this self-awareness more difficult, is that we are complex creatures. And then for leaders in particular, there is the difficulty of finding time, right? Nobody wants their leaders self-reflecting all day long. Leaders have busy schedules and busy days. And we, by design of the job, we ask them to focus a lot on other people, and that can make it hard to focus on yourself. And then the final thing, and this is especially true for leaders, people do not like to give each other negative feedback. I think oftentimes there are, many corporate cultures are kind of nice corporate cultures where constructive, corrective, direct feedback might not be the norm. But across the board, this is more true for leaders. No one wants to tell the boss what they're doing wrong, right? There's a level of risk to that. There's a level of threat to that. And so leaders can really find themselves in these kind of cocoons. And there's just a couple of great quotes on this slide, and they're a few years old, at least at this point. But one that I love is the CEO of Infosys. He said, "Beware the good news cocoon. As a leader, you are more likely to get positive feedback. People will bring you the wins, the successes, the good news. They might not be as quick to bring you the bad news. And so as a leader, it's your job to seek that out, to proactively go out and make sure that you have a full understanding of what's happening in the team and how the team is seeing you, right? Where are you getting in the way? Where can you do better as the leader?" But people are not going to volunteer that information. You're going to have to go and seek it out. So that was a little bit of a grim picture of leadership. The good news is that I do think that there's a way to help leaders. And again, I'm passionate about this because if you look at what organizations do, organizations go to their leaders and they say, "We need you to take care of your team. We need you to be in tune with them. We need you to onboard them. We need you to guide them. We need you to set goals for them and hold them accountable for results and understand who they are." That is the job that we give to leaders. Take care of other people in this organization so that we can all be successful. I think what we as coaches and consultants and people in our industry can do is take care of the leaders. And I think that's a pretty noble goal, right? If we're asking you to take care of everybody else, then we can do something for you. We can offer that same care to you. So how can we do that? Well, obviously coaching, right? I had a slide and I hit it because again, I get carried away with data, but there is a lot of evidence that more and more organizations are embracing leadership development, embracing executive coaching, really wanting to spend time and money on their leaders, right? On programs that will help their leaders be more effective, be more engaged. Leader engagement is a direct predictor of employee engagement. So there are these very tangible benefits to developing your leaders, coaching them, making sure that they're engaged. But I think overall, organizations are just recognizing more and more that leaders need this kind of attention and, tender loving care in order to be successful with their teams. So there's a lot of ways that you can coach. I mean, I'm sure that you all know as many, if not more than I do. But what we're going to focus on, of course, is assessment-based coaching, because at Hogan, this is where we have really found success. We have really found that if you use valid personality-based assessments and other data points like 360 surveys, things like that, you can kind of supercharge your coaching with some insight that is just not likely to be available from other sources. So what do I mean when I say that? Well, first, let me back up and say that one of the things that we look at Hogan is coaching in other arenas, specifically in fitness and sports. So I was involved in creating a solution we have. It's called the Hogan Leadership Experience. And when we did that, one of the things we really thought about was, where does coaching get it right? If we look at leadership coaching, what other types of coaching can we equate and can we kind of adopt some techniques from? And what immediately became apparent was sports coaching. And the reason for this is a couple of different things. So at Hogan, we define effective leadership as the ability to build and maintain a high performing team. And nowhere is that kind of leadership more apparent than in team-based sports, right? Whether it is football or rugby or basketball, whatever sport it might be around the world, if you are playing a team-based sport, there is an aspect of coaching in that. And even individual sports, there's an aspect of coaching in that that helps an athlete get to the highest level of their game. And that's what we're trying to do with leaders. I think it is inaccurate to look at leadership and say there are good leaders and there are bad leaders. Those things are too hard to define and they're too dependent on context. What makes a good leader in one organization, in one function, in one geography might be a little bit different than what makes a good leader in another organization, another function, whatever it may be. So I don't like this idea of saying, there's kind of good and bad. I think that with leadership coaching, what you always want to think about is every leader is coming and they're at a base rate. They're at this level. What we want to do as a coach is elevate them, right? It's not about being good or bad. It's about making you the best leader that you can be for the context that you're in. And that's really similar, of course, to athletic coaching, where it's all about making the athlete perform at their highest level in the team. So what can we learn from all of this? One of the things that we immediately notice is they use individual assessment. So you never go to a training session with a fitness instructor or a coach and they just start you, on the treadmill. I have an older sister. I'm very close to her. She is a marathon runner. Even though we are very similar in a lot of ways, I don't run places. By choice, I'm not running, right? I'm walking at a slow pace. So if my sister and I were go to a fitness instructor and they were to say, jump on the track, run 5 laps, she could do that easily. She could do that without being out of breath. I don't know if I could do it. I might only make, 3 laps or 4 laps. So that is one of the kind of key things that we looked at was this importance of individual assessment. Of course, we knew it. We're an assessment company, right? So we knew that this was going to come up. But the other thing that we noticed was that they give constant feedback. So when you're playing sports, you're either getting feedback from what's going on around you, you're making goals, you're blocking goals. So it's this immediate environmental feedback. And then you're also getting a lot of feedback from your coach, right? What you did well, what you could improve upon. And then the final thing is they adapt. They don't say, hey, you missed that shot and we think it's because you can't make that shot. They say, hey, you missed that shot or that goal. And we think if you did it a little bit differently, you might get a better result. And I think that leadership coaching can be the same, right? We don't want to oversimplify it. They are living in a complex world and they have these competing demands. But these simple principles of assessment, feedback, and adaptation, I think can really help to focus a leader's coaching journey and again, kind of supercharge the effects of coaching. So to break that down a little bit, why do we need assessment? We think of assessments to coaching as diagnostics are to medicine. So when we're using assessments in coaching, we're doing it so that we have a baseline knowledge of where this person is coming from, what some of their natural tendencies are, and then how other people might see them just because of their natural tendencies, just because of how they operate on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of our coaches will say, I think a lot of coaches in general really lean into the idea of getting to know the leader. And I do think that's important. It's very important to have those conversations where you're learning how they see themselves, you're learning what their context is. But to follow on with this analogy, up to 50% of people admit that they lie to their doctors. So I did a little Google research before our session today. And the thing is, when people look at this, they say, look, there are multiple reasons that somebody does not tell their doctor the truth. Number one is you just might not want to admit to your doctor what you're doing wrong. And again, if you go back to those self-awareness slides we looked at a moment ago, that's natural. Our egos want to protect us. We don't want to admit to our bad behavior. But I think the bigger thing is really not around willingness to tell the truth, but ability to tell the truth. In order to tell your doctor the truth, you have to have recognized something in yourself. You have to have noticed a symptom or noticed something wrong or something different and bring it to their attention. But, anyone I'm sure who has been to the doctor and thought they had like a slight cold and they end up with a flu or they end up with something more serious, you don't always know that. You can't always say, here are the ways that here are the things that are going wrong, or here are the things that I need to get better. And that is where assessments really come into play in coaching. So when we think about personality at Hogan, and for those of you who are familiar with Hogan, this will be a familiar concept to you. We differentiate this idea of identity versus reputation. Your identity is the you that you know. It's the story you tell yourself about yourself. And there is nothing wrong with that. But your reputation is what other people say about you. It's the story that other people would tell about you if they were asked to describe you. And most of the time, this is kind of a Venn diagram, right? These are overlapping circles. So your identity is here and your reputation is here. But what we know from our research is that they are almost never, if ever, matching circles. There is part of your reputation that other people are not telling you, that you may be unaware of. And as we discussed earlier, there's this part of your identity, your intention, that might not be immediately apparent to other people through your behavior. So this is why we talk about the importance of assessment in coaching. Because if we rely on you just coming to your coach and saying, hey, I'm a leader, here's how it's going, here's what's going wrong, here's what's going right, you're bound to miss something. There's bound to be a nuance in your approach or something about your team and how they're reacting to you that you just don't know. Not because you are negligent, not because you've ignored it, but because there's just no way for you to know about it. With valid personality assessments, so with the kind of assessment that we do at Hogan, this is how you kind of overcome some of these challenges. So number one, a valid personality assessment is going to provide individualized, actionable insight. So it goes from that overall kind of, here are these competing demands in leadership, and you just have to address them all, into here are these competing demands in leadership, and here is your approach, right? Here is how you're naturally going to take on these tasks. If left to your own devices and your own, best judgment, here is what you are likely to do and how other people are likely to see that. The other thing that is really helpful about personality assessments and really 360s, any kind of valid talent assessment in coaching, is that it allows you to really get into when something needs to be addressed, whether, leveraged and put a spotlight on it if it's a strength, or adapted or compensated for if it's an area where you have a gap or where you have a development need. This is a big deal to me. I think that when we say to people, what is a strength, what is a weakness, that's the wrong question. I think that's too simple of a question. I think the question is, when is this thing that is true of you a strength for you? So I'm a naturally extroverted person. I'm naturally outgoing. I like talking to people. That's a strength for me when I am in this kind of situation where I have to speak to a group and, really be willing to kind of put my thoughts out there and be okay if you disagree with it. When it becomes more of a challenge is when I'm doing things like a job analysis or design thinking, something where I don't get to talk. I have to sit back and be silent. And that can be really hard. I know there are at least some of you on the call who feel like silence is just the worst when you're in meetings. And so that's a time when that extroversion is something that I have to adapt. So I have a rule that I do not talk first on meetings. I listen first, right? And that's my adaptation to the fact that this outgoing, high sociability kind of nature, it's a strength in this arena. I can let it shine and just be me and enjoy it and hope that you all enjoy it as well. But when I'm trying to learn from other people, I have to zip it and I have to remind myself how to do that, right? I have to be more conscious of it. The other thing about personality assessments, and this really goes back to what we were talking about around strategic self-awareness, people are just really complex. And, it's so interesting because sometimes I'll be coaching someone and they'll say, well, you said that I was really calm and cool and collected on an everyday basis, but then you said that I was really emotional and volatile when I'm under stress. Like those two things can't be true. But yes, they can be, and they are. And if you dig in with people, they really can start to see that, but they can't articulate it, on their own. If I just walked up to somebody and said, tell me about your values, your day-to-day work style, and your derailers, they would have a very hard time saying, here's what motivates me. Here's how I approach things on a normal everyday basis. And here's what happens when I'm under stress. We aren't that self-aware. We just aren't. And so what can happen with personality assessments is that you really can dig into these nuances of a person's style, right? If you're normally calm and collected, but something happens that makes you all of a sudden become emotional and volatile, we want to understand what that something is. We want to understand that trigger. We want to understand how you can manage those tendencies. And so this is another way that assessments really help. It allows people to identify blind spots, both strengths and, potential watch outs or development opportunities. And just a couple more. So anytime you have one piece of evidence, it helps to have another. So if you are doing any kind of 360s in your coaching, whether that's a survey or interviews, if folks have gotten engagement data, a lot of times leaders that I coach will have some engagement data or a previous performance review or a previous talent review. Anytime that they have that evidence around their leadership, what we tend to find is that personality assessments will back it up. And so if you see something on a 360 that says, hey, this person is very detail oriented, but sometimes they get too far down into the details and they need to pull back a little or pull up a little. Oftentimes a personality assessment will say, yes, this person is detail oriented, right? And they do it when they're faced with ambiguity or when they're faced with uncertainty. They want to kind of seize control of things. And so with these multiple data points, it makes it a lot harder for a leader to say, no, that's not really me, or no, I don't need to work on that. It makes it harder for someone to, rest on their laurels when they have multiple data points saying these are things that you need to be aware of and things that might impact your leadership effectiveness. And then finally, and this one is really for coaches. So we have spent so much time talking about what we can do for leaders, and of course, that's the point of today's webinar. But I will say that at Hogan, we always have multiple end users. We have the leaders who are taking our assessments, but we also have the coaches who are interpreting results and helping those leaders. Personality assessments can help the coach. Because when you have this data at your fingertips before you go into the coaching relationship and engagement, you're going in with some knowledge. You're not starting out as strangers. You're starting out with something that the individual has already shared with you, right? You're starting out with insight. And with Hogan, that insight is really powerful because what we do is we say, based on how you responded to this assessment, here's how other people are likely to see you. Here's how you're likely to behave in a given situation. And so when you start with that knowledge, then you can very quickly dive into, okay, what is your context? When is this working out for you? When is it causing you struggles, etc.? Then the other thing, of course, and the last thing I'll say is really around informing behavior change. So I mentioned this at the very beginning. And again, with sports coaching, I mentioned that adaptation. Personality assessments are not just good about providing you insight. They help you to plan your development in a more strategic way. And so, what I mean by that is if you went to someone who was, say, low sociability, they're an introvert, they're independent, they're a little bit quieter and more withdrawn by nature, it probably would not do much good to go to that person and say, go speak on something in public, right? Go do a webinar or go out and go network with 20 people you've never met before. That's too much of a stretch for them. Even if they could do it, it would be uncomfortable and they couldn't sustain it. So the power in assessments with coaching is not just in creating that strategic self-awareness, but also in saying, okay, if we want you to adapt in a certain way, we need you to be more innovative in your vision, or we need you to hold people accountable with a little bit of a heavier hand. Here are some actions that you can take that are consistent enough with your natural approach that they are sustainable. You can't come to me and say, Jocelyn, stop talking in meetings. I will never be able to do that. I'm sure some of my coworkers wish that I could, but that's never going to happen for me. But what you can say is listen first. You can still talk, but don't be the first person to talk. That is achievable for me. That is a behavior that I can not just do once, but make a part of my regular habit and response. And then the last point I'll make, and this is something that we always talk about at Hogan, is once you've looked at a leader's personality, their approach, kind of where they're coming from and how they lead, just in their natural state, then you can start to say, okay, how can your team help you? I believe that every person's greatest asset at work are the people that they work with. And you can tell that at Hogan, we're blessed to have a great team because I believe that to be true. But I do think that for leaders, because of those competing demands, you're never going to be able to do it all. But what you can do is figure out, here's where I'm particularly adept, and how can I help my team in that area? And here's where my team is really strong, and how can I learn from them in that area? And I think that is it for me. So I will stop there and turn it over for questions or comments.